How high up do you think the message went that there was fraud? Do you think it made its way to the governor's office?
I struggle to believe it didn't. I have to believe that the governor's office and Keith Ellison's office were aware of this. They've said they were involved in helping the FBI. They've said they were made aware, but apparently I'm scary, so they couldn't do anything. I don't know.
You have an understanding that 1,000 whistleblowers running an account on X have come forward to expose fraud in Minnesota state agencies, and they have been entirely ignored by Tim Walz and have even been retaliated against. Is that accurate?
That is correct. Even this morning, I got another message.
Well, in your experience, are their claims credible or are they politically motivated against Walz?
They're completely credible, not politically motivated.
I have to believe they were aware. And again, if they weren't, shame on them for having a system that their lower level staff don't bring something of this level to their attention. I honestly believe Keith Ellison and Governor Walz need to be held accountable.
Tim Walz is begging for money. Take a look at this. He is asking for donations to a legal defense fund. This is not a campaign fund. If you remember, he is no longer running for re-election. He is so toxic, they basically told him to give up. This is a legal defense fund. The message says that the DOJ is investigating Tim Walz on baseless charges. Actually, let's read the entire thing here. Tim Walz here. Last week, the federal government opened an investigation into me. This comes just weeks after a federal ICE agent fatally shot Renee Good in Minneapolis, unleashing chaos across our city. Rather than take accountability and working to turn down the temperature, Donald Trump and his administration are fanning the flames by targeting me for demanding transparency and answers. Let me be clear, weaponizing the justice system and threatening political opponents is a dangerous authoritarian tactic, and I won't let it slide. My job is to defend Minnesotans and the rule of law, and I'm sure as hell not backing down. But the road ahead is long, difficult, and expensive. If you're with me, please rush a donation to our legal defense fund and help ensure that we can keep fighting for accountability, transparency, and justice. And then you see later on there that he has some ideas of how much money you can send him because he is going to need it. And why this is so interesting is we've been covering the Minnesota fraud situation for weeks now. Feeding Our Future, the daycare scams, the Medicaid fraud, all of it. There's some issues that Tim Walz is dealing with now that I guess he needs some lawyer money. Aimee Bock, the convicted ringleader sitting in jail waiting for sentencing, just gave an interview, and what she said a few days ago changes a lot of things, and maybe that's the reason why Tim Walz needs that money. She is claiming that Minnesota officials knew about the fraud, not just suspected her of having it, knew about it, approved it. So today we're going to be looking about what Bock actually said, why a convicted fraudster might be actually telling the truth this time, and why Tim Walz is now scrambling to hire lawyers. Let's get into it. Aimee Bock was convicted in March on all 7 counts. She is facing about 33 years in prison. Her assets has been seized, $5.2 million, a Porsche, designer bags, all of it. She has every reason to stay quiet and hope for a lighter sentence. Instead, she gave an exclusive interview to CBS News from her jail cell, and now she's talking.
I wish I could go back and do things differently, stop things, catch things. At that point in time, I believed we were doing everything in our power to protect the program.
But in 2021, Bock sued the state agency that oversaw the meal program, alleging its scrutiny of Somali applicants was, quote, discriminatory. How do you think state officials took that?
Nobody wants to be labeled as being racist.
How high up do you think the message went that there was fraud? Do you think it made its way to the governor's office?
I struggle to believe it didn't. I have to believe that the governor's office and Keith Ellison's office were aware of this. They've said they were involved in helping the FBI. They've said they were made aware, but apparently I'm scary, so they couldn't do anything. I don't know. I have to believe they were aware. And again, if they weren't, shame on them for having a system that their lower level staff don't bring something of this level to their attention. I honestly believe Keith Ellison and Governor Walz need to be held accountable. There needs to be an investigation done. If they weren't aware, that's concerning. Why are there not policies, expectations, rules in place that they be made aware when there's suspicion of this level of fraud?
She said, we told the state the site was going to operate at this address, at this time, with this number of children. The state would tell us that this is approved.
2 years later, it submitted nearly $200 million. All of a sudden, you're cutting $200 million worth of checks. How do you not see that as major red flags and keep this going?
We relied on the state. We told the state, this site is going to operate at this address, this day, this time, and this number of children. The state would then tell us that's approved.
She says local officials, including Rep. Ilhan Omar, would visit the mail sites. Now, Omar has denied knowing about the fraud and condemned it, but Bock's point stands. This was not some secret operation. She's saying that very powerful officials were physically present. Bock says that she actually stopped some fraudulent claims. She says that Minnesota state officials are using her as a scapegoat for their failure to properly monitor the program.
It's from the lawyer of this woman, Aimee Bock. She was convicted in this massive Feeding Our Future scam. That's how it all started. Bock's behind bars, and her legal team says, where's the accountability for Governor Walz and the Attorney General? They knew that this was going on. He says nothing happened until the Fed stepped in. Do you think some of these politicians should be held accountable?
I would like to see someone in the state, I don't care whether it's the governor, I don't care whether it's the Attorney General, someone take responsibility.
Now, I know what you're thinking. She's a convicted scammer. She's a fraudster. Even in this interview, she's claiming that, well, I didn't know this was happening. Even though you have the Porsche, you have millions of dollars. I mean, come on. I understand that. That's what these people do. They lie. But remember what we've been talking about in this series of videos the last couple of weeks, the state audit that came out last year, because that audit backs up almost everything that she just said, the one that came out in June 2024. Let's go back through it now with Bock's claims in mind, because suddenly all the pieces fit together. She said that we told the state everything and they approved it. The audit confirms that MDE did not always take the steps to verify statements made by Feeding Our Future prior to approving its program applications. They just rubber stamped it. Bock says that the officials knew about the sites. The audit does reveal that MDE provided no documentation of any in-person site visits during the pandemic. Here's what's really crazy about this. Federal guidance encouraged states to do oversight. MDE chose not to. I wonder why. Bock says I actually stopped fraudulent claims. And you know what? The audit might actually support this. It says that MDE received at least 30 complaints about Feeding Our Future between 2018 and 2021. 30 complaints. And what did MDE do? They inappropriately asked Feeding Our Future to investigate complaints about itself. How does that make any sense? Why would they investigate themselves? Most likely they're going to say, we're doing nothing wrong. So think about what that means. If Bock was getting complaints and actually rejecting some claims, she could legitimately say that she was doing more oversight than what the state was doing. That's completely insane, but that's what the audit is showing. And most likely she's just doing this to try to protect herself. So if something goes wrong, she can say, well, I did something rather than do nothing, even though she was probably a part of the scam. This was her trying to save herself. So now Bock also claims that she's being scapegoated for the state's failures. Is she? Well, the audit uses the phrase inadequate oversight created opportunities for fraud, not might have created. The audit says that MDE was ill prepared to handle this, that it failed to act on warning signs going back before the pandemic even started. And here's the smoking gun that we talked about in the previous videos. The lawsuit that she talked about here. In 2020, Bock sued the state, claiming that they were discriminating against Somali applicants, which is hilarious. She filed this right after George Floyd's murder during the height of the radical justice protest. The lawsuit accused MDE of racism and preventing hungry children from accessing food.
But in 2021, Bock sued the state agency that oversaw the meal program, alleging its scrutiny of Somali applicants was, quote, discriminatory. How do you think state officials took that?
Nobody wants to be labeled as being racist.
Minnesota officials told a state watchdog the threat of legal consequences and negative media attention intimidated them into easing off.
The notion that a state government is paralyzed and has to allow this level of fraud because they were afraid of what I might do in a lawsuit is preposterous.
And of course, the judge sided with her. The judge ruled the state couldn't stop payments unless they could prove fraud. The judge ordered M to pay Feeding Our Future $47,500 for processing applications too slowly. The state was literally fined and forced to keep paying. The audit says that the lawsuit had a chilling effect on oversight. MDE became scared to take action. Remember, this is back in 2020, which everyone was very sensitive to the idea of being racism. They knew that she would call them racist. And after a judge ruled in her favor, they basically gave up. So when Bock says from her jail cell, they knew, they approved it, and now they're blaming me, the state audit actually backs this up. Not the part that she's innocent, because she's not. She ran the scheme, they knew exactly what she was doing, and she got caught red-handed. But the part that the state failed at every single level, that is documented. Like I said, we've been covering the Minnesota fraud for weeks now. The daycare centers that don't exist, the Medicaid fraud, the whole 9 yards, the autism services scam, and it all connects back to the same thing. The complete failure of the state oversight during the Walz administration. Remember U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson's claim that up to $9 billion of Medicaid fraud happened in Minnesota? Walz calls that number made up, that Thompson was just politicizing this situation. But here's the thing. We have a convicted fraudster saying that the state knew everything, and an official state audit confirming the state failed at every single level. So really, it's not really about politics. It's about documentation. Now let's talk about Keith Ellison for a second. He is the Attorney General during all this nonsense. The office was responsible for investigating fraud in state programs.
Now they're looking at the state's Attorney General, Keith Ellison. Why? Because the state's top cop here in Minnesota was caught in an audio recording behind closed doors meeting with a group of soon-to-be convicted Somali fraudsters. They were asking the Attorney General for help to get more funding. Listen to this.
The only way we can protect what we have is by inserting ourselves into the political arena, putting our votes where it needs to be, but most importantly, putting our dollars in the right place and supporting candidates that will fight to protect our interests.
That's right.
You can only protect our interests when we have your back, and you don't have to worry about who's behind you.
And also this group was talking about, as you heard there, supporting his campaign. So Keith Ellison is pushing back on this. He said that he takes fraud seriously. He shared in an op-ed writing this: I took a meeting in good faith with people I didn't know, and some turned out to have done some bad things. I did nothing for them, and I took nothing from them. But some of those now convicted Somali fraudsters did donate money to Ellison's campaign, according to documents obtained by the Center for the American Experiment. Ellison reportedly later gave the money back because those people were convicted.
What does that mean for Walz and Ellison? If they knew accusations of racism was going to prevent oversight, if they knew the lawsuit was having a chilling effect and they did nothing to fix it, that's the problem. This is not just incompetence. This is just failure as leaders. So now we have the Trump administration freezing federal payments to Minnesotans. We have FBI and DHS resources to investigate. They're calling Minnesota a hub of fraudulent money laundering activity. Can you say some of this is politically motivated? Maybe. But the problem is they're investigating documented fraud that happened under Walz's watch. The question whether fraud happened, we all know it did. Aimee Bock is going to prison for it. The question is, who else knew? Who else could have stopped it? And who's going to be held accountable other than Aimee Bock? That's what brings us back to this legal defense fund. You look at the donation page again. The DOJ is investigating me. Please donate now to help aid this fight. Baseless, that's the word they use. But let's think about what we know right now. If the charges were baseless, then why would he need lawyers? He's not fundraising a campaign. He's not fighting for his political future. He's preparing for a legal battle. So what happens next? Aimee Bock hasn't been sentenced yet. She's waiting in jail and she's talking. But if she decides to cooperate with federal investigators and she starts naming names and providing some documentations, this thing gets a lot bigger. Remember, 78 people have been charged in the Feeding Our Future scam. More than 60 have pleaded guilty or been convicted. Some of them are cooperating. Some of them have information. And if Bock saying that state officials knew, you better believe prosecutors are going to ask those defendants the same questions. This is why Walz is worried. But he also has some more issues that he should be worried with these new allegations of Signal chats. Now, what the hell is Signal? Signal chat is just another messaging app along with WhatsApp or a Facebook Messenger.
The clashes with DHS or federal law enforcement officers in general are not happening at the federal building so much anymore. They're happening at intersections. How do you know that federal law enforcement are at these intersections? You're in the Signal chats.
What has been revealed is that very close allies and agents of the Minnesota architecture and infrastructure, power infrastructure, have locked in and are operationally giving service and state resources to these chats. These chats tell left-wing agitators where ICE is, tracking them, stopping them from enforcing the laws of America, following them, stalking them, training left-wing agitators in shifts.
How do you know that federal law enforcement are at these intersections? You're in the Signal chats. I've patrolled the streets of southern Minneapolis, which is where both of these shootings happened, looking for interactions with federal agents. You can't find them unless you're in these Signal chats. Once I joined the Signal chats, I was able to track them like that.
But they're serious enough that the FBI is actually investigating this. So claims are circulating that Minnesota officials, including the Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan, and others connected to the Walz administration, might be involved in a Signal chat groups that were allegedly coordinating against ICE operations in Minneapolis. The allegations come from a journalist who have claimed to infiltrated. A lot of stuff is happening because there's a very intricate and organized communications group where they're able to coordinate with each other on where ICE is and where they're going next.
Our neighbors are being disappeared. P.S. Without due process, it is just called kidnapping. Then show up and use your voice. Put your body on the line.
Way back at the beginning of this second Trump administration, the very first vote that was taken under this Trump administration was for the Lake and Riley Act, which strips immigrants of due process. There were a handful of Democrats who voted in favor of that bill. My opponent, Angie Craig, was one of them. She also voted for a resolution this summer that praised ICE. Shame. And so we get to tell the truth in this race. We get to tell the truth. And the truth is that Minnesotans deserve better. Our immigrant neighbors deserve better. So we're going to keep showing up for each other. We're not going to throw people under the bus if it's politically expedient, because that is how authoritarianism reigns.
Now, we know for certain that Flanagan has been very critical of ICE publicly. She has called federal agents untrained. She urged people to record them. She even told crowds to train up to resist ICE operations. That's on public record. That's her exercising her political voice. But the problem is that these allegations go a little further, claiming that there's actual coordination and encrypted chats to track and impede federal operations. If true, that's a different level entirely. If state officials were using Signal groups to organize against federal law enforcement, that raises some serious legal concerns. So we're talking about that because it's a pattern. You got the feeding our future issues. Then you got this coordination, allegedly, with people in the Walz administrator coordinating against ICE, the same groups that some of the people that have been killed participate in. So it looks like Minnesota's leadership is putting politics over their actual responsibilities. But we're going to keep following that story as it develops. The Walz administration appears to have repeatedly failed to fulfill their basic responsibilities as public officials. So now you have Aimee Bock. She's guilty. She's going to prison, but she's not wrong about everything, at least in my opinion. The state did fail. Multiple state audits have proved it. Audio recordings proved it. And now we have federal investigators looking at all of it. So this story obviously is far from over. We're going to continue to follow every development into feeding our future prosecutions and what's going on with that Signal chat, because that also could be an issue. And that's probably another reason why Walz is probably looking for some lawyer money. But let me know what you guys think about this story in the comments below. Thank you for taking time to watch this video, and I'll see you guys in the next video.